Today it's well known that by April 1945, most of the Nazi leadership found themselves cut off and surrounded by massive Soviet forces in Berlin. Amongst them were Adolf Hitler and his soon-to-be wife, Eva Braun. Neither would escape. But what really happened in those final hours, and where did the drama unfold? In this short video, we'll use all the latest available technology and mapping techniques to pinpoint to the very meter where Hitler's bunker lay and what passed there in the final days of his life. First off, we need to head to Berlin and the Central or Z Zone, as it was known to the city's defenders. This is the area in which a mixture of die-hard Nazis and reluctant old men and young boys found themselves fighting for their lives once the noose had closed around the capital. Included in this central area were the famous Reichstag, Reichschancellery, Goering's Air Ministry, and of course the Führerbunker itself. For students of this period, it's generally understood that the Führerbunker was located under this rather nondescript car park and that Hitler committed suicide and his body was burned in this vicinity. But where exactly did that happen? The first key piece of evidence in finding the exact location of the Führerbunker comes from wartime schematics, created for the building of the bunker in 1944. It shows a two-level complex, the upper part named the Führerbunker and the lower part the Führerbunker. With dozens of rooms protected by meters of reinforced concrete and state-of-the-art gas protection, it was a formidable structure. Now, we know from records that the Führerbunker pre-existed the Führerbunker and was used as an air raid shelter until 1943. It was located directly beneath the old Reichschancellery in the heart of Berlin's government quarter and made up around 16 small cell-like rooms which included storage for luggage, provisions, a generator, toilets, a canteen and several small accommodation rooms which would be taken over by the Goebbels family in late April. The Führerbunker itself came as a later addition, completed in 1944, 2 meters deeper and linked to the Führerbunker by a single passageway. One of the most junior personnel in the bunker at that time was radio operator Rokas Misch. He described his first impression of the Führerbunker in detail.
Down the last couple of steps and finally we were in the deep bunker. Hitler's bunker suite. Construction work had begun far too late and it was not ready, having not dried out. Because of the remaining damp on the wall, it smelled stale. I looked around and screwed up my eyes, getting accustomed only slowly to the harsh light of the naked lamp bolts. How minute everything was, how sad, unready, unworthy. The Reichspost technician explained the division of the rooms to me. They were no more than cells. The corridor was only 50 meters long and divided into 2 halves by a concrete bulkhead and a door. On the left was firefighting equipment, and on the other wall a long narrow table with chairs. Right at the end was another bulkhead, behind which was an emergency access into the Reichskanzlei garden. In the first room, on the right of the corridor, technician Herschel worked at his machinery. A diesel generator and various pumps which supplied fresh water. Opposite the machinery room on the left side were the so-called wet rooms, a bathroom and toilets. Immediately adjoining Henschel's was my room, with a telephone switchboard which was without a door and open to the whole floor. As well as the telephone room, there were 4 others. First, one came to an anteroom, with a table and 4 chairs on the left-hand side. From this room it was possible to access another room, occupied by Dr. Morell and later Goebbels. To the right the corridor went down to Linger's room and a surgery and dressing station. Then one reached Hitler's rooms. The first door on the left led immediately into a lobby. From there one went left into a room intended as Hitler's dressing room, but which was taken by Eva Braun. The lobby led into Hitler's study and living rooms. Even these rooms were only 3.5 by 3.2 meters in size. In the living room, a sofa and 3 chairs were squashed together. The big furniture pieces made the room look cramped. From here, one turned right into Hitler's bedroom, with a bed in the far corner. On the other side, one crossed a small floor into a red room with toilet and shower. Then reached Eva's room. Here, tortoiseshell lamps hung from the ceiling. From the central corridor, the second door led into the map room, which, in the final weeks, military situation conferences were held, despite its tightness. After my first tour of the bunker, I was greatly relieved to step out into the garden through the emergency exit. I began to sense what it meant to have to endure this over a long period of time, and also realized that for me, such a time was dawning.
As we heard, the whole complex was pretty uninspiring. Perpetually damp concrete walls, sparse furnishing, tightly enclosed rooms, no natural light, and the constant hum of generators and pumps made life highly unpleasant for those in the bunker, including Hitler, who by mid-April would descend and, with the exception of a few short trips to the surface, would remain underground for the rest of his life. So how do we find out exactly where this bunker was with real accuracy? The first step lies in wartime aerial photographs taken by the Allies during flights over Berlin in March 1945. This photograph of the central government district highlights many key buildings: the Air Ministry, the old and new Reichschancellery, the Brandenburg Gate, the Spree River and the Reichstag. These we can use as a sort of signpost to accurately identify the spot. One of the problems in finding the Führerbunker in post-war Berlin is that the city was so badly damaged in 1945 that many buildings were pulled down and much of the road layout changed when the city was rebuilt. But some of those major markers still exist and we know haven't moved. So let's take modern Berlin and compare it to the 1945 aerial to recreate Hitler's government quarter as it looked at the time. This isn't that simple either. We need to know that the original photograph perspective is correct. Satellite images are generally fine. They're taken from a height of around 450 kilometers, so we know the imagery is straight down. But wartime aerial photos taken at a much lower level are often slightly oblique. An error of just a fraction of a degree can throw out an actual positioning by hundreds of meters at the least. So we need to triangulate. That is to say, highlight key positions in Berlin on all corners of this map and compare them to the modern imagery. So let's try it. These are great markers. The bridge over the River Spree to the north of the Reichstag, which still exists in the same spot as in 1945. This corner of the Reichstag building, which again we know hasn't changed. Here a distinctly shaped building on the same road which leads to the old Reichschancellery. And we can see that each of these locations matches with the 1945 image with a good degree of accuracy, and that further to the south, the edge of the famous Potsdamer Platz also fits as it should, telling us that the wartime image perspective is accurate and therefore our overlay is correct too. So we know that works. Let's zoom into the government headquarters district. Here we can see that in the post-war years, those famous government buildings have almost all been replaced with blocks of flats, restaurants, a children's play area, and most notably a car park. This, we know, is broadly the area where the Reichschancellery was to be found in 1945. One problem with actually finding the bunker is pretty obvious: it's underground, which makes aerial reconnaissance of limited use. But we do know from this contemporary image of the bunker that a few parts of the complex remained above ground, namely an observation tower with a distinctive coned roof and a squared emergency exit into the Reichschancellery gardens. It's not easy to do with 1945 quality photographs, but we can actually identify these key objects right here on the map. The tower and the building are both just about visible and give us a good guideline as to where the bunker was. Now, to add the bunker complex itself, using those two above ground points, we can blend out the historic map and identify the spots directly beneath on the modern ground. By marking these two key locations on the modern view, we have at least two accurate points of reference, including the distance between them, which gives us the scale. But to triangulate, we need a third. This is a bit more difficult, and we need to consult this excellent 3D plan of both the bunker and the old Chancellery Hall to achieve it. We can see here that the bunker complex actually starts directly beneath the hall, and we can see that on the aerial. So by taking common points at the edge of the building and marking those on the new map, we can triangulate the exact position of the bunker. Now we repeat the same process, embedding our specially drawn bunker plan into the modern map to identify the exact location with real certainty of exactly where the Führerbunker lay. Interestingly, it's slightly further south than many people suppose, towards the southern end of the car park and slightly under a block of flats, but still in the same vicinity. And so, it was right here in late April that Hitler and Eva Braun met their end. But can we use this same mapping to track those events? Eyewitness testimony tells us that by the end of April, Hitler had finally admitted he was not going to be leaving Berlin alive and that the war was lost, which in fairness had been obvious to everybody, except him apparently, for many months. Eva Braun too knew this, and seemingly had come to Berlin with the express purpose of dying alongside Hitler. To many people's surprise though, a notary was called and made a perilous journey through Berlin to reach the bunker. It was here, just after midnight on the 29th of April, that Hitler and Eva Braun married, with Eva famously beginning to sign her surname Braun before crossing it out and writing Hitler instead. Unsurprisingly, it wasn't much of a honeymoon, with the newlyweds spending a little time with the last remaining residents of the bunker, including Mr. and Mrs. Goebbels and their 6 young children. In fact, the Hitlers, the best man, the witnesses, and even the notary who performed the marriage would all be dead within days. By late on the 29th, Russian guns were pounding the government district and Soviet tanks were less than a kilometre away from the bunker. Around 2 AM on the 30th, Hitler summoned his secretary, Traul Junger, to whom he dictated his last will and testament, appointing Admiral Karl Dönitz as the new president of Germany. On the 30th of April, Hitler called his adjutant Otto Günscher and valet Heinz Linger and informed them of his and Eva's plans to commit suicide. With news of the public display and maltreatment of Mussolini's body the day before in Italy, Hitler was desperate to escape the same undignified fate, and so issued orders that the vehicles in the nearby garage were to be drained of their fuel and their bodies burned after death. Originally, it was believed that Hitler intended to poison himself using cyanide supplied by Heinrich Himmler, though when Hitler learned that Himmler had been secretly discussing peace terms with the Allies, he feared betrayal and that the poison Himmler had given him would not be effective. So instead he tried it on his beloved dog Blondie. It worked. Some short time later, after assembling the remaining staff and saying their goodbyes to their inner circle, Hitler and Eva made their way to this small, damp room in the Führerbunker, where, sitting on a couch, Eva bit down on a cyanide capsule, whilst Hitler simultaneously shot himself in the head with his Walther pistol. A few minutes later, Linger, alongside Martin Bormann, cautiously opened the door to find Eva, her lips purple from the cyanide, on the couch with her legs drawn up around her, and Hitler by her side, killed by a gunshot to the temple. Linger described what happened next.
While Bormann went outside to fetch help, I spread out the blankets, laid the bodies upon them and wrapped them round. Eva Hitler was carried out first. Bormann picked her up in his arms and brought the body over to the room where Erich Kamka took over, because he did not like the idea of the man she had despised in life now carrying her to the grave. I reached below Hitler's head. 2 officers from his bodyguard lifted the body, wrapped in a grey blanket, and we carried him out.
Records tell us that those carrying the bodies travelled through the Führerbunker and exited via this doorway, and that they entered the badly shelled Reichs-Chancellery gardens where they found a shell hole in which to place the bodies. Here's Linger again.
Immediately in front of the bunker door in the Chancellery garden, his body was laid next to Eva's in a small depression, where gasoline was poured over the bodies and an attempt was made to set them alight. At first, this proved impossible as there was a fierce wind circulating. I returned to the bunker and made a thick spill from some signal papers. Bormann lit it and threw it onto Hitler's petrol-soaked body, which caught fire immediately. Standing by the bunker entrance, we, the last witnesses, raised our hand for a last Hitler salute.
So where exactly did this take place? By turning the clock forward from our map, we can reveal modern-day Berlin and very likely the exact spot where Eva and Hitler's bodies were burned, which is, rather fittingly, in a totally unremarkable road junction next to a nondescript street in central Berlin. With news of Hitler's death spreading, many in the bunker later reported feeling like a spell had been broken. And individually or in groups, most began to flee, vainly hoping to escape the fast approaching Soviets. Most wouldn't make it. The Goebbels family were an exception. Having murdered their 6 children in their beds with cyanide on the 1st of May, they too headed to this same area of the Chancellery Gardens, where Goebbels drew his pistol, shot his wife and then himself. The pair also being burned in a shell hole. Joseph and Magda Goebbels' bodies would later be positively identified through the device Goebbels wore for his club foot, which was found amongst the charred remains. The Goebbels' children wouldn't be found for another 2 days, still in their beds in the bunker. Within 24 hours of Hitler's death, the Russians had captured the Reichstag, and all meaningful defence in central Berlin ceased shortly thereafter, and the race to find Hitler began. Shrouded in controversy and secrecy to this day, it was unclear as to where and when Hitler's remains were discovered, but it was likely about 5 days later by Soviet troops who kept it a secret from the Western Allies. In fact, Stalin claimed that he'd not found him at all, and this spawned a long persistent myth that Hitler may have escaped the encirclement of Berlin and fled to safety, location unknown. The reality is far less dramatic. Hitler was found, and his almost completely burned remains identified relatively quickly. One of the few remnants to survive the fire were Hitler's teeth and part of his lower jaw. Very quickly, the Soviets found Hitler's dentist assistant and got her to sketch, from memory, a plan of Hitler's extensive and almost unique dental work, which perfectly matched the remains discovered in the Chancellery Gardens. Not only that, but Gunscher, Linger, Misch, his chauffeur Kemke, and several other witnesses all saw Hitler's body, were part of the group that burned it, and were subject to brutal interrogation by the Soviets about the events for years afterwards. Had there been another version, it would have certainly come out at the time. What's more, even after repatriation to the West, all the witnesses continued to tell the same story. The myth though, and it is a myth, persisted, with sightings and theories around Hitler's escape continuing to this day. So, did a seriously ill Hitler even remotely possibly escape the bunker in Berlin? Well, unless there's a tunnel under this spot leading directly to South America, he didn't. And even if there was, he didn't take his teeth with him, and a large portion of his jaw, both of which today reside in a Moscow archive. So what became of the bunker itself? As we know, the Soviets captured and retained control of Berlin at the end of the war, and when the city was later divided into 4, the bunker remained just inside the Soviet zone. Some attempts were made to destroy the remnants, and above ground sections were destroyed. When redevelopment finally took place in the 1990s, some parts of the bunker were uncovered, and a few Berlin residents even managed to make their way inside and capture some rare photographs before those visible remnants were destroyed or filled in by work crews. It's likely, though not certain, that even to this day parts of the bunker complex still exist, relatively intact, beneath this spot in Berlin. And so, this unassuming location today still may retain some of its history, albeit out of sight to those who walk these streets. And maybe that's how it should be. Personally, I think it's fitting that the end of one of the world's most horrific regimes, and the man responsible for it, is largely unremembered here, and that only a stone's throw away lies a powerful memorial commemorating millions of those he put to death. This should be obvious, but to clarify, the idea behind this video, of course, is not to commemorate an individual or to condone an ideology, but simply to highlight a location where, at one time and in one moment, history came to pass.